Here we are, still in the Ways and Means Committee room. It is still Tuesday, May 5th at 2:10. We are continuing our work on H 933. And we're going to hear from Kirby. Can you hide yourself, please? Thank you. Bill.
I think I was Carol, didn't we?
Thanks. I did it several times in a row. I'm so sorry. Now I'll just say.
Kirby, the floor is yours. We're all going to pay attention to you now.
Good afternoon, Kirby Keaton, Legislative Counsel, here to walk through the Senate proposal of amendment for H 933 and the language itself. Note, it is not posted on the committee webpage because the Senate is in the process of posting it right now and it just hasn't come up. If you want to search H 933 and refresh throughout, maybe at some point while I'm talking, it will pop up on there. Otherwise, I have this version that was sent to me for just review before posting. So it's not the official thing, so I've not shared that. But it's the language, so
Sorry.
it worked for our purposes.
You do have this passed by Senate, section by section, is that accurate?
You have that, and that is accurate and updated. There's a summary chart that I updated this morning for you. We just don't have the bill language public yet.
Bill, you're talking about the bill language, bill,
Yes.
but not this.
But if you want to follow along on that, that is up to date. And we'll probably be walking along through that anyway. Okay, so with that, we can go through each section. I'll plan to go up since there's 71 pages, I'll plan to go over things pretty quickly. I understand that Pat has covered a whole lot of ground already, so I won't start going into details. Did you lose me?
That's not how that should look. Where is that?
Oh,
One more time.
Close.
Don't think that. I don't rewatch any of this.
We believe you.
Should I stop sharing and try again?
Not sure what happened down here.
I don't know, but this seems to work now. This happened last week too.
Good.
Who knows? Hard when we have to look at our own faces though.
Okay. Section 1 repeals the denial of tax credit for S corporations for taxes paid in other states. From that. Section 2 addresses the loophole in the administration of the transfer tax, the high transfer tax rate, the higher transfer tax rate for certain sales of properties like second homes. Which the fix there is just giving the department the ability to look into those situations on an audit type basis. Sections 3 and 4 are the changes to land use change tax and current use to give PBR the ability to do evaluation when a portion of a parcel is unenrolled. Section 4A is one of the new ones. The first one allows one owner or a forester working on behalf of an owner to sign a forest management plan when it comes to enrolling forest land in current use. And for the 4B extends the date at which certain parties can object to an appeal to PBR for property valuations.
Kirby, can you go back for a second? The whole thing about the current use plan, is that? Were you in the room when they were talking about why?
The 4A?
Yeah.
It was a request from the department and the gist of it was it is very difficult when there's cases where there's multiple owners. Apparently, I mean, if you look at the language that's being changed, apparently the department was interpreting the language, a management report of whatever activity has occurred signed by the owner. And so they had apparently interpreted the owner as all the owners when there's more than one. And due to that interpretation, it was getting arduous. So they asked for a change of words to allow an owner.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And that committee over there, the ag committee, did discuss this.
Makes
I'm
sense.
fine with it, yes.
Thanks.
So, you know, there could be conflicts, multiple owners, maybe some of them don't agree with the forest management plan or the enrollment and.
Yeah, it could be fun. Yeah.
Okay, so the objections to appeal we covered. 4C is to include just in this bill, that's the same repeal of the grand list content section that's being replaced in 955. So this is being repealed in two places, which is fine. Section 5. Relates to the municipal grand list stabilization program and using the tax rate from the preceding year for the calculation for grand list stabilization. Section 6 had some changes from the Senate. One change is to add this clarifying language to the definition for communications property in the statute that has PBR using inventories do valuation for communications property, specifically to be very, very clear that one-way broadcasters are not included. This section also was changed in that the effective date for this was put out a year. So this clarifying language was moved out a year, and so were the penalties that PBR had proposed to add. So both of which will be effective in 2027.
Representative Bodie?
Can you, when things are moved out a year, I wanna try to understand why was that moved out?
Do you want me to just give you the background of everything that's happened in this section? So when it came to Ways and Means in the first place, it was one of the tax department requests. They had requested for this section of statute that's fairly new because recently PBR took over the valuation of communications property for two-way communications. That's because this process was started and took place of something called the telephone personal property tax or telephone business property tax. But so there used to be a tax that was just for telephone companies. That was that standalone tax was repealed and it was changed so that PBR started doing the valuations on that property instead. So that happened. And so what this request was for that new statute to include the $100 for violations in cases where a taxpayer does not provide the inventories or work with PBR to do the work they need to do valuations. So they just asked for penalty provisions to be added. So that's what you did. When it went to the Senate, there were concerns from one-way broadcasters, like radio stations, that came up because they were sent inventories by PBR recently, because this is the first, right now is the time that PBR started doing this for the first time ever. And they sent out apparently a lot of inventories to a lot of potential taxpayers. And so those that were one-way broadcasters were not happy because they are like, we are not telephone companies. What are you doing? And they were, so they reached out to the legislature and said, we want this fixed. And Senate Finance said, we are willing to add this clarifying language in, and we're also willing to push back the effective date a year so that within the next year, at least PBR won't have the power to fine you if you don't cooperate with them.
And we got an email from the Broadcasters Association in support of this language on Friday. Does that sound right? Okay, cool.
Section 7, release the equalization study, and for purpose of equalization, CHIP sites are to be treated the same as TIF districts. That was when the CHIP,
That's not a change, that's just that we never specified.
when the CHIP program was put into law, there were other things to think about than the equalization study. So in the interim, it occurred to PBR to say, you want us to treat this the same as TIFs, right? And that's what this change does.
Skip, I don't say anything.
I'd say whatever you want, remember.
Yeah, I just want to mention that last year, the TIF districts took $9.3 million out of the ed fund, scooped it out before it even got to the ed. I got that from fiscal people. And CHIPs, does that mean we're giving them permission to use that equal amount of money, or is this just a totally different thing we're talking about? But what are the advantages we're now giving to CHIP? Another
So-
point mil?
This is just to make sure that when the equalization study is done, that the real property that's part of the CHIP site it's taken into account that it's part of a CHIP site. Just like you would do with the TIF for equalization.
The permission has already been granted under the legislation we passed last year. Right, yeah.
Okay.
This is to make sure that the equalization study doesn't have something funky about it because of lack of recognition of CHIP.
Uses the market value, not the original taxable value for the equalization study.
So it's money going the other way from what I think it's going. It's going,
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but no, it's calculating the delta between what it's worth now and what the original taxable value was. So the increment.
thank you guys. I still don't like it. 9.3.
I think, so what I would say, I mean, yes, CHIP, but what I would say about this and the equalization study is that it's not allowing any, it's not allowing whatever's happening with CHIP to sort of deteriorate the valuation of the statewide grand list, which is helpful. Because it's still,
Yeah, specifically, and I apologize for skimming this too much, but specifically what this is doing is when they go to do the equalization study, they have to look at the values for the property, right? And it's really a clarifying provision saying that the fair market value will be used for equalization, not the original taxable value, which is what's used in CHIP. So we're saying for the equalization study, we're going to kind of disregard CHIP and we're going to treat this like regular property so that, because if you did it the other way, it could cause a distortion that's not helpful for equalization.
Thank you.
And the fair market value, the taxes on that fair market value, they do go back into the education fund. Is that not correct?
After 20 years, yeah.
Well, it takes a while.
we have time to relitigate CHIP if you want to participate in that, Kirby.
No, but I just wanted to clarify.
So the equalization study doesn't affect the taxes paid. Want to be clear about that.
I mean, it sort of does in a secondary way by leading to the CLA, which affects taxes paid.
Yeah, the ripple effects for everyone, you mean? But yeah, but not on those specific properties. Okay. Section 8 also deals with the equalization study. And this is a change that instead of using a calculation, PBR will just, and the year after a master reappraisal, provide that municipality with a 1.0 CLA. And move on. Sections 9 and 10 extend the health IT fund to 2031. Sections 11 through 14 are in the education finance areas of law, changing the inflator from NEEP to NIPA.
Is it fair to say we're not gonna do an inflation metric study this session?
Representative Holcomb, I promise the second there is a study, you will see the study. I think the staff's under a lot of pressure to do things. There's no, okay.
Section 15 is the request from the taxpayer advocate relating to property tax credit and how it's calculated in situations of divorce and separation, so that a claimant can receive 100% of the credit in that situation when the other owner does not live there.
There's so much on this bill. I'd really forgotten little pieces of it.
Section 16 is the filing threshold for estate tax, where the filing threshold is moved up to the taxable threshold. Section 17 is
I don't mean to interrupt, but is there a paper copy that people are looking at? It has these sections in it. Mine only goes as far as section 13.
So we're,
you would not have a paper copy of this because we are looking at the Senate proposal of amendment, and as far as I know, it's not public at the moment.
Okay, that's fine. I just want to make sure I wasn't missing something.
This will be posted on the committee page today. So
That's okay. That's very good. Thank you.
Okay. But yeah, the summary
Yeah.
does have this.
Right, it's right here.
I'm gonna try to grab it from the page right now.
okay, thank you.
It's great.
And I don't need a paper copy before anybody else.
Okay.
Thank you. So we're on section 17 that extends the down payment assistance program to 2031, and it increases the maximum total award for a first year credit allocation from 250,000 to 350,000. So for this period between 2027 and 2031. Section 18 is the findings for the SGO contributions, the new federal tax credit relating to scholarship granting organizations. The findings remain the same as always, which is in this case stating, basically making a case that Vermont we can do what we want here with these findings. And then 19 goes on to say, but we're going to give it to the governor. If you recall from our conversation on Friday, subsection A here allows the governor or designee every December to prepare a list of scholarship granting organizations that can be submitted to the U.S. Treasurer for purposes of making those organizations ones that people could donate to, and that during that year that starts in January, and then be able to claim up to $1,700 income tax credit at the federal level for that donation. Subsection B creates some Vermont-specific requirements for those organizations. The first requirement is that it has to meet the definition under federal law. The second is that it is a nonprofit organization with the core mission of providing educational opportunities to economically underprivileged students through after-school programs, summer programs, tutoring, and similar programs. Number 3, that all grants and scholarships provided by the organization are to students attending a public school or an independent school capable of receiving public tuition. Number 4, all grants and scholarships provided by the organization are for students to attend a program that is partnered with or approved by a public school or an independent school that's capable of receiving public tuition. And when determining whether to award a scholarship, the organization does not discriminate based on all of the characteristics that an employer would not be able to discriminate on. Subsection C states that annually on or before January 15, each scholarship granting organization listed in the previous year has to provide a report to the education committees here, providing a lot of information relating to the amounts of scholarships, the numbers of scholarships, the number of scholarship recipients, a list of all of the programs that their scholarship recipients had attended, and the amount of funds received by each of those programs, the total number of individuals who made donations, including the zip codes for those individuals, the total number of money received as donations, the total amount that was spent on administrative costs, with a description of those costs and accounting for any unspent funds that are currently held, and a list identifying all employees, officers, and board members of the organization that includes their position and the compensation they received. It also has a provision saying that in the governor's discretion, the governor may audit these programs. And also a provision that the governor shall not list an SGO that does not meet the federal requirements.
And we spent quite a bit of time on this last Friday.
We went over it on Friday. I'm going over it in more depth right
I
now
appreciate that.
because it's a new thing, right? And then you
I was more reminding the committee than asking you not to continue.
understood. I was gonna go ahead anyway. No, I'm just kidding. So subsection E is that there's some provisions added here that are meant to not allow the governor to submit a list of SGOs if any of these provisions are overturned by federal law. And Representative Kimball pointed out that this word should be section ideally, instead of having this provision apply to the end, all of H 933.
Yes, Representative Higley.
I have a question in regards to the Attorney General's piece there. So, is the Attorney General going to be aware of their duties in regards to this? And is there a timeline at all, or just?
It's supposed to be something they monitor. When Senate Finance asks for a provision like this, there has to be some entity that makes that call. And so I chose to make it the Attorney General because I'm aware that in the past, the Attorney General has had a role like this before in past laws in Vermont where there's supposed to be, like a trigger if something happens at the federal level, especially. And when it requires legal knowledge, it's, the Attorney General. I think in the past, I'm not remembering the specific details, but there was federal changes either relating to income tax or sales tax where the AG's office had to monitor that as well and inform the General Assembly when this federal event occurred. The way that this would work, I would think, is that, there's people who work in the AG's office who specialize in tax. Some of the people who work in the tax department are actually, assistant AGs. So imagine one of them would be maybe charged with, checking in on making, whatever developments happen at the federal level with this tax credit, and then letting the AG know if they think that this has been triggered.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Did the AG review this section of language?
No, this is, we haven't heard any feedback.
Have they been asked?
I don't think so. I think the tax department would be in contact with them and they're monitoring this. But I don't know that they haven't, since this was included, I don't think that they've testified.
Representative Bodie.
I think I had the same question as I had when we went over it the other day, but I'm just wondering, why is the governor in charge of this and not the auditor? Or why is the governor on it and not the auditor? Maybe why is the state treasurer not taking this as a job for the state treasurer's office? And originally we said, we're gonna wait for federal regulations. So and if we're giving all this power and then decide we're not gonna, we're gonna take it away, and then people may be disappointed. Some would be given and then taken away. So I'm just, about the whole thing,
So,
curious.
I guess I would say I feel curious about all those questions too, including the fact that there are people who seem to be assigned tasks on this that haven't weighed in on it, which seems like a good idea. So I personally don't want to concur with this section.
Well, I didn't know if this is not, are we? supposed to
Yeah, this is me pivoting,
go,
because
or-
why not pivot? Let's pivot to that part.
And then
Yes.
I think you'd want to consult the AG before we do.
Yes, I think I just,
Yeah, no, I,
Okay.
Just am affirming.
Yeah.
They have to legally represent the
Yes.
state when the state is sued.
anyone else want to say anything about this section? Great. Yes, sorry, Representative Bodie.
And were you there when this was being discussed?
That would be,
Yes.
that would be like, what, telepathic if not.
So. Can you recall any of the discussion? Was this?
So subsection E, it has to do with the concerns of moving forward with a version of this where Vermont is trying to add additional requirements, but they're concerned that the IRS regulations that have not been released yet would undo those requirements. So that's what E is meant to do, is to stop, like put the brakes on if part of it's overturned.
Get the E part, but all the rest of it, E is like the best part. It's the rest of it.
So, yeah, I can tell you the history of all of it. Subsection A came out of S312, which was a Senate bill out of Senate Education that originally was going to have Vermont participate in the SGO tax credit program, and have the governor be the designee for identifying the SGOs. So A came from that. B came also from that, except Senate Finance added some extra requirements that were Vermont specific in 4 and 5 here. Subsection C was part of S312. No, C was not, sorry. C was added entirely by Senate Finance, which is all the reporting requirements for the SGOs as a way for the General Assembly to keep track of the SGOs and the programs, to get some information yearly about how this is going. Subsection D was in S312, which is kind of administrative stuff. And then E was added by Senate Finance out of the concerns we were talking about with the IRS regulations.
Thank you.
So,
Good definition. How much more do we have?
44 sections, 46.
we are on page 20 of 71.
I have these other people here to talk about other stuff.
There's a large chunk of moving the grand list date in the middle, but there's still a lot of substance to go as well.
Are you two supposed to be somewhere? So we could go, let's hang out with you till 3.
Okay.
Okay.
Section 20 is the change to definition of a parcel. I don't have a note for.
I'm on the section by section.
Same as we have.
That's you.
It's like a hotel where there's like the floor on the elevator that's missing, but it's the haunted section. So anyway, so section 20 has to do with grand list contents and is the mapping for contiguous parcels language that has continued to hang out for a long time.
Okay.
So that's what this change is. Sections 21 through 23 are the, yes.
I got a grant list and I got contiguous parcels. What else? Don't know about section 20.
This is for the GIS office.
Yes, it's for state mapping and it's so there's some extra information's collected for mapping purposes, but not in a way that would affect the property valuation or taxation system at all.
And why is it in this bill?
It's miscellaneous.
Miscellaneous.
It's a good place to move rocks.
A version of this was in Act 73 and it was problematic and we repealed it many times over. And so this is this, if you remember the repeal that was in 4C above, it was a version of this.
Okay. Thank you.
The effective date got pushed out on this one, I will note. I knew there was something I was forgetting. Tax had come into Senate Finance to say, we're not going to be ready for this change. And they pushed this out to 2028, I believe. So only the GIS.
Very patient.
be effective. Sections 21 through 23 are the Fish and Wildlife Fee Setting Authority sections. The finance did not end up changing these.
Which is a miracle.
It was almost happened once or twice, but
And then appropriations almost changed it once or twice, but just all.
it's remained intact as it left the House. And if you need a refresher on this, this is starting next year, repealing the regulations and part of the fee setting authority for Fish and Wildlife. They're keeping their statutory authority to issue licenses for research, academic study, commercial use, or use by their regulated facilities, and to set tuition at the Green Mountain Conservation Camps. This has nothing to do with hunting and fishing fees, which is something that comes up because that's already in statute and not part of this. This is about fee for use of their lands and facilities. This language will result in Fish and Wildlife having to re-adopt regulations. And they'll have to report back next year on recommendations for statutory fees that the General Assembly could act on. Section 24 is the start of changing all of the dates for the grand list submission to January 1, and that takes us all the way through section 48.
Chris, can you send Representative Holcomb that presentation that you did about the purchase and use of the meals and rooms growth trajectories? Sure. Thanks.
Section 49 removes the statutory language empowering the director of PBR to supervise collection of delinquent taxes by municipalities. This was on their request, stating that they have not done this work for a while. There is a new section 50, which is the change to allow a 5% increase in the municipal share of local option taxes collected in fiscal years after the pilot special fund had a surplus of 18 million or more. And we talked about the many payments that are made out of the pilot special fund and how there's new ones being added in other bills this year.
Representative Wozniak.
Just on this piece, I think that there's, I don't love the way this is structured. I think that there are a lot of folks who have concerns with the structure of the pilot payments themselves. And before we start to go very far down the road of how much surplus is there or changing percentages in years that do or do not have a surplus, I think we should have a conversation about pilot payments.
That sounds great. I also recently learned that we might be expanding stormwater utilities and that the state might be on the hook for payments for stormwater. And it seems like if we're doing that, that should probably come out of pilot as well. So I don't even know what's going to happen with pilot. So I think we should definitely take more testimony on pilot.
That's an interesting idea.
Thank you.
It's very interesting.
Oh, wait, you had it right.
No, I have a little tutorial on how the state would be on the hook.
Oh, gosh, that would be fun. Let's do that too. I think regardless, this is a funny thing they did and we should talk about it more and not concur with it.
Sections 51 through 53 are still deleted from the House floor.
What's the aviation thing there?
Hmm?
Is there something about aviation in 50?
Jet fuel. That's, there's provisions within the
Oh, yes,
lot,
yes.
within the local option tax about jet fuel, yeah. Some fun trivia. Section 54 is the JFO 10-year tax study. Was not changed.
What? No, she's part of it's exempt from.
Section 55 is the decoupling changes.
Representative Odie,
I'm thinking a lot
about what?
about this stuff. And I'd like to know who's going to give the directive, JFO, about what should be, what question should be in this stuff.
I believe we did that here in this
Yeah.
section of statute.
Really?
That's what it is.
I need to go through the items that they are to study.
I personally.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we passed in the Senate, left intact, but yes, that's why we're here.
Number one, starting with 2015, analyze historical trends comparing Vermont taxes to the tax systems of other states, including a comparison of the percentage of Vermont revenue from each state level source to the percentage of revenue from each state level source in other states. That will be interesting because we don't have all the same taxes as other states. Number two, analyze Vermont's taxation levels and tax responsibilities per capita, per income level, and by incidence on typical Vermont families of varying incomes and on typical Vermont business enterprises of varying sizes and types.
When you say
Other people on that aspect.
Vermont family very is that when I use family by year, I mean, I don't hear individual paying units. And do you mean people with children? I don't know what that means.
I would, there's room for interpretation there for JFO. They would have to interpret it. It could be, based on average household size, for instance, might be considered a typical family as opposed to a family that has many, many children.
Is that, I guess. I would want to know about a particular tax.
So Representative Odie, we've had this language already, but we can talk more with JFO about it at another.
Change some other thing.
We can, so this is
All right.
an area of agreement, so it probably wouldn't be open for the conference.
But we could.
What? I didn't hear what you just
We
said.
could talk with them.
Absolutely, they love to talk about.
All right. Sorry, but
Sorry, I'm hot, I'm getting sillier. I get hotter.
It happens, yeah.
Yes, it's really, yes.
Do you want me to keep going or are we good with the study?
We're good, I think we're good with the study. We'll talk about it more.
actually.
So section 55 is the decoupling from federal income tax for particular things. We've talked about this a lot and Pat already thoroughly went through this earlier, so I will not repeat it. I will just flag when we get to section 55A that this is new from the Senate. It has moved the decoupling for gains from qualified small business stock to its own section because this section will be effective a year later. This is Pat walked through this before. So this change would be effective for tax year 26. The other decoupling and conforming changes are to tax year 25. So you have the actual decoupling language. And then you have what Tax and I had to come up with for the partial exclusion for capital gains. And then we make the same change for estates and trusts. Section 56 is the update to personal income tax apportionment to put in the statute that Vermont's additions and subtractions will be used in the calculation for apportionment. We talked about how that was an issue that came up when we were looking at this. It was pointed out by the tax department. Section 57 also makes changes for personal income tax apportionment along the same lines to take into account our additions and subtractions. Section 58 is the increase to the research and development tax credit. This is effective for 2027. It's not immediate. Section 59 is the increase to the downtown and village center tax credit. The Senate did change this. You had set the increase up to 4 million, and the Senate brought that back down to 3.5 million. Section 60 and 61 are the link up to federal income tax laws for tax year 25. And then in 62, it's section 62 and 63 are the changes to the deposits of revenue for meals and rooms tax and purchase and use tax, so that the amount of meals and rooms tax that is deposited in the education fund is increased to make up for the loss of purchase and use tax, which is being moved to the transportation fund. Sections 63A and 63B were crafted lovingly by John Gray over there to address an issue with the Burlington Waterfront TIF. 63A is a recitation of.
Folks feel okay skipping this? We just reviewed it in depth last week.
You good? Okay. That's so many snarky things to say. Section 64, effective dates. I would like to walk through this if it's okay, to make sure everyone's aware of the timing of things. So a lot of the technical and housekeeping changes are effective on passage. So everything's effective on passage except for the following. The S Corp tax credits is retroactive to tax year 2025. The current use and land use change tax changes are to take effect October 1, 2026, which is for the application deadline for current use in 2026. The communications property effective date, as I mentioned, was pushed back to 2027. The section 20 grand list definition relating to the mapping and the contiguous parcels, as I mentioned, was pushed to 2028. The Fish and Wildlife fees change, that rule will be repealed on July 1, 2027, so it's not repealed immediately. The idea is that that will be put into statute before the rule is repealed. The grand list date being moved to January 1 is set to take place in 2031. The R&D credit, as I mentioned, is for tax year 27. Most of the decoupling changes are for tax year 2025, except for qualified small business stock decoupling, which is tax year 2026. And then the local option tax change, there was a new addition in section 50, is set to take effect on October 1, 2026, which means that the first time that the Commissioner of Taxes will look at whether there's a surplus will be at the end of the fiscal year in 2027.
Okay, thanks.
That's all.
Representative Higley has a first hand there.
I'm assuming that, because it isn't specifically mentioned, section 8, the proposal of the equalization study, that DVR use 100% of the CLA when determining tax rates in municipalities after they completed master appraisal. I was gonna go into it, like if town had it appraisal last year,
Mhm.
this new provision would go into effect this year, correct?
It would be effective on passage, so it would be put into effect or be applied for the first time the next time PBR does an equalization study. Which. What,
Yeah, I think they.
I'm not remembering that's the
they've
fall or
already-
spring.
They've already done it. They've already done latest equalization stuff, so that's why.
Yeah, it wouldn't affect that one.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Fixed it. Representative Bodie.
I wondered if you could just talk about the local options tax with the dates, because.
So with the way the effective date works is that the next end of June. When I say next, I mean in 2027. So the end of June 2027, the Commissioner of Taxes will look at, after paying everything that's required by law to pay out of the pilot special fund, determine whether there's more than $18 million in excess in the pilot special fund after those payments are made. If so, you'll announce it to the world, and for the next year, the municipalities that collect local option tax would get an 80% share instead of a 75% share. But only if there's an excess of 18 million. And then they'll start doing that every end of June.
One more clarifying question on that then. So that happens, we go to 80-20. The following year, there's only a $17 million surplus. Does it revert back to 75?
It does.
Which could also make it difficult for towns to budget.
It was originally proposed on the Senate floor as having a contingent effective date where once it switched to 80, it stayed there.
Stay the date.
And they had issues and this was.
I've long been a big fan of sending more monies to town, but just want to do it better way.
Yeah, and I don't want to pretend that we've solved a problem that we haven't solved. Yes, Representative Brady.
I think the one I'm concerned about is section 49. Does this have anything to do with, our local tax collectors? They're delinquent tax collection, and they make a percentage of that when they're collecting. Will that continue, or does somehow the director of PDR get paid for that?
No, what you're describing will continue. There was a point in which there was some state oversight of those local tax collectors.
Decades ago, yeah.
I have no recollection.
Probably decades. And so that the PBR has not thought of itself as being the regulator of those people and has not done that. And so this is just taking out sections of statute that relate to PBR managing those people because so this would remove any question
Okay,
about PBR being able to manage local tax collectors.
they're not going to manage them at all. It's
They're not doing it, and then this even makes it even less likely that they would ever do it.
Very good.
Yep.
But I don't remember when they ever did. Pretty old. Don't get it, don't.
Thanks, Kirby.
Get it? At all.
You're older.
Okay, guys.
Maybe, Kirby.
Given where we are in the session, I don't think it makes sense to send a version of this back to the Senate. So I'd like to do a straw poll to go to a committee of conference, discuss the minor differences that we have. Do folks? Can I just finish my whole sentence?
Yeah.
So, do folks want to take a straw poll on that now, or would you rather we wait until tomorrow? But we have questions beforehand. Yes, Representative Bodie.
Aren't we going to do some discussing about how we feel about things before we go off the conference committee?
Well, the conference committee wouldn't be scheduled for a while and we could continue taking testimony on it. It's on the, it's up for action tomorrow at 1, so we have to make a decision by then. But we can absolutely, we'll have more than enough time to continue taking testimony on it to inform the work of the conference committee. Does that sound good? Okay.
Are there things that you're really concerned about?
There's a few things. Yeah. Representative Wilson?
I think we should not concur, but my question is more, I don't know how, I mean, I'm not sure how we talk about this bill, the yield bill, without talking about the ed bill, because I feel like there's interactions between all three of them at this point. And I'm very uncomfortable with letting the ship sail before we know how to come down.
I think that's good reason to go to a conference.
I 100% agree.
Yes. Organize them in the harbor.
But
Organize the ships in the harbor.
Yes.
Where they allow.
It would be a mistake to let them go.
It's a sailing metaphor.
I know where you were going.
Okay, let's wait a moment for Representative Wozniak to get back and then we can do that before we finish today. But before we do that, let us pick up S 328. We'll do the shuffle after S 328, just so we can all be here. Is that okay? Is that confusing to just jump back and forth between things?
You're
It is confusing now, isn't it? Okay, let's do the straw poll now without Teddy. All those in favor of going to a committee of conference?
What?
All those in favor of going to a committee of conference? All those opposed? Great.
Once.
10-0-1.
10-0.
Great. With that, let us move to S 328. The Cameron Wood. That's you. You go sit there and tell us things. Folks, we are not going to vote on this today because it's possible that House General is going to ask us to offer some amendments while the bill is here. And so we're going to hear about the bill and then maybe spend time tomorrow on that if that is the final decision from that, if they do ask us to do that.
Take it away. For the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel. I'll walk through S 328 and a proposal of amendment from the House General Committee. Before I jump into the language specifically, you all recall there was a housing bill that came out of House General earlier this session, H 775, that is now in Senate Economic Development. Senate Economic Development passed their housing bill, which is S 328. That went to House General. That's what we're going to walk through today. What the House General Committee has essentially done is taken the provisions that were in 775, taken the provisions that were in 328, combined them together. There were certain sections that were not in conflict. And then there were some pieces where the committee decided to go with what was passed in the Senate version and sometimes go with what was passed in the House version. And so I will point some of those things out as we do this walkthrough. So here we have draft 4.2 that was voted out of the committee. The first section here is related to common interest community resources. Don't know that we got into common interest communities in this committee during the session, but a common interest community, you may know them referred to as a HOA, homeowners association. In statute, they're called common interest communities. And what this first section here is putting in statute under the provisions governing the Secretary of State's office says that the Secretary of State shall provide on its website or otherwise distribute to the public information about Vermont's common interest communities. This information shall include the governing statutes. Questions? None. Moving on. Okay. That was not in either housing bill, so that is new for this amendment. Section 2 is related to service-supported housing. This section was not in the House bill that went over. This was initially in S 328 that came over from the Senate. Last year, in what became Act 69, you all passed a study committee to look at how to create a state plan to develop housing for individuals with developmental disabilities. And there was a report that was done by that committee, and part of the recommendations were continuing their work. And so what this section is doing is it's putting into statute an ongoing advisory council that would live within the Department of Aging and Independent Living. And as you can see here on the subsection A, that it would be for increased alignment between human services programs and policies serving individuals who receive Medicaid-funded developmental disability services and housing capital and support services programs. I'm not going to walk through this whole section line by line. It's a committee. The membership is there on the top of page 2. The committee is intended to meet at least monthly, and the council, on a committee, my apologies, the council has to provide a report annually. It's on subsection F on page 3. And the report has to include administrative program reforms, housing needs assessments, activities undertaken, recommendations for future legislative action, and funding sources, all designed to help increase program support for individuals who are receiving Medicaid-funded development disability services, and to help identify areas where you can build more housing dedicated for these individuals. So it's a continuation of the work that was started in that study committee during the summer. Okay, moving on, page 4, section 3. These next 2 sections are related to the state treasurer's credit facility. Now, there was a version in 775 that you all passed. There was a similar version in S 328. What the House General Committee is recommending going with here is the version that was in the House Bill 775. So they've taken what the Senate did and substituted what the House version was, which is increasing the current credit facility from 10 to 12.5%, authorizing the state treasurer to, as part of that 12.5%, to do a 1% for the purchase of offsite or modular housing. And then that coincides with the next section, which begins on page 6, which is this offsite construction accelerator pilot program through ACCD, where ACCD would look at working with municipalities to try to identify ways of doing bulk purchasing of offsite constructed housing and being able to place those homes somewhere within those municipalities. The only change to this language as it passed in H 775 out of the House is when you look at the top of page 7, as part of the pilot program, the pilot is supposed to look at adopting building codes for offsite construction. And the House General Committee has now added the language on lines 2 and 3 that those codes should incorporate elements of visitable and adaptable standards for building design.
Yeah.
The visitable and adaptable standards are standards to make the homes more accessible for individuals who may, have a disability or be older, or it's about the design of the home to make it accessible to more people.
As they're not required to be built that way, the guidance just has to include that guidance.
The housing has to be built to meet the visitable or adaptable standards depending on what type of housing it is. So what this change here is to say that as you're developing these offsite constructed modular homes, if you're going to, as part of the pilot, look at designing a building code for the state for those offsite, design homes, you need to incorporate elements of visitable and adaptable standards.
Would this be the same as ADA compliant?
Yes, sir. There are certain adaptable standards that have to be met to comply with the ADA. The Vermont Division of Fire Safety has adopted standards applicable to the state that in some instances go beyond what's required at the federal level. Then there's a question about the applicability of them. When and to what buildings do they apply to? There are certain buildings that are exempt. So for example, multi-unit housing that is less than 4 units are exempt. If you're building a single-family dwelling that is going to be built by the owner of that property, then they do not have to meet the visitable standards. But if it's a single-family dwelling that is built for sale to someone else, built by a developer, they do have to meet certain visitable standards, which is about, the width of doorways, access to certain, ground level entrance, things like that. So. Okay, so moving on. Again, this is the pilot program. It expires on November 15th, 2020. Nope, excuse me. The report is 2029. The program expires 2030. All of this is the same as it passed the House in 775. So that brings us to page 8. Section 5, making a change regarding the Vermont Economic Development Authority. This was in 775, but it has been slightly tweaked, the language, to address some concerns that were raised by VHFA and VEDA. So if you all recall, Vermont Economic Development Authority, they are kind of the sister equivalent to the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. VEDA provides, funding to economic development initiatives across the state. As part of their definition of eligible facility or eligible project, they are not allowed to fund housing unless it's authorized in the section. And so what you have here is we're adding into that definition of an eligible facility that VEDA can fund. After they consult with VHFA, VEDA can fund multi-unit housing developments of 5 or more units. Top of page 9 here, if it's requested and jointly financed with a financing lender. And there was some clarification language on lines 3 through 9 to make sure that it was clear that VEDA can fund portions or phases of a multi-unit housing development if it's not being funded by VHFA. And unless VHFA determines that the portion or phase is being developed for persons of low or moderate income as defined. What is this in here for? It was slight tweaking of the language to make sure that it was clear that if the housing development or the portion of the housing development is being targeted for individuals of low and moderate income, VEDA can't finance it because that is really the purview in the universe of VHFA. If it's
VEDA can't ever support housing development that's for lower moderate income.
under this, correct. They shall not finance portions or phases of projects that are with the agency, if the HFA makes a determination that it's for individuals of low or moderate income as that's defined.
Curious why, but I think I'll ask the committee of jurisdiction rather than you. Okay.
Can't tell you why, but it was a change specifically requested by those two entities because this is the language that they've agreed to. As far as why you want that much of a restriction on VEDA's funding ability, I defer to those two agencies or the committee.
Thank you. Professor Maslin, do you still have a
That was
question?
my question, Zach.
Thanks.
Okay. Next on page 9, the next section, we are in VHIP. And this was a change that was in 775 and it hasn't changed. There was one addition. But if you recall, this is where the department, currently VHIP is a reimbursement program. So the developer is working on remodeling the home and then they're getting reimbursements as part of the grant or loan document from the department. This language will authorize the department to provide that money up front if it so chooses. And so the only difference here and what passed in 775 is they've added a technical amendment here in this subsection J. As I was reviewing the section again, I realized that this annual report requirement that was included last year in Act 69, there was no date on when the annual report needed to be submitted. So it's simply adding a date in here. Okay, next section, special assessment bonds. I can comment that, your legislative counsel, John Gray, put just as much love into this language as he did in the previous bill that you reviewed. There is nothing that has changed in this section from what passed in 775 in the House version of the bill earlier this year. Keep moving for time. We get to section 8 regarding municipal plans. If you recall, in this committee, there was language that was going into when a municipality has a regional plan or a municipal plan, part of that plan has to include a housing element. And there was language being added to require that that housing element has to include if there's any things that are prohibiting the municipality from being able to meet its housing targets. And if they couldn't meet its housing targets, the municipality had to provide information to the Department of Housing and Community Development. The Senate passed a similar version of that language, and the House General Committee chose to go with the Senate version of the language, which is a lot more succinct and more directly targeted in what you're looking for. So this is the language that was worked on the Senate side that VLCT supported, the Regional Planning Commission supported in that committee. And so the House was okay with going with that version. Again, bottom of page 12, top of 13, requiring the housing element to include analysis of constraints preventing the municipality from meeting their housing targets. That was actually an amendment that we made to their bill. Yes, sir, it was. Yes, sir, it was.
Look, they still.
Scrapping the good work that you all did earlier this session. I'm sorry. Okay, next section, section 9 is related to municipal zoning, and the change is going to be here on page 14. I think we talked about this earlier because it was also in a separate bill. This is to ensure that the municipalities have to allow for manufactured housing in any districts that allow year-round residential development. And this is just adding manufacturing into the list of homes that already are required to be allowed where there's year-round residential development, and then adding that clarification in. So no change to what you all passed earlier this year in 775. Now we get to a few sections that are going to be new, and these are all about reports. The first report is a report that was in S328 as it came over from the Senate. So this was not in 775, not in the House version. The Senate was looking at language earlier this session about these common interest communities. As I mentioned, these are HOAs, and they were looking at language that would prohibit a common interest community from limiting unit owners' ability to lease out their unit for a rental. They were also looking at language that would prohibit a common interest community from limiting you from operating a, I want to get the term, I think it's a in-home childcare center. So it's the childcare centers that operate out of an individual residential unit. There's a specific phrase there, and I may not be getting it correct. But there were a few different provisions that the committee was looking at limiting common interest communities' ability to restrict what you can do with the unit that you own. And there are a lot of legal issues that go along with that. And so the committee felt that it was best if they simply pull those provisions and include a report from our office to you all outlining what those legal issues and concerns would be. So that's what this report is going to require our office to review. The key language is going to be starting on line 16 here. Any legal, conventional financing and funding compliance issues related to requiring a common interest community to authorize leasing of residential units, authorize commercial purposes within a dwelling unit, and permit the construction of ADUs on land reserved for the exclusive use of a unit. Okay.
You can set it.
Yes, ma'am.
On
And I
common,
appreciate the question.
common interest. Is there any tie into either allowing or prohibiting Airbnbs? Is there any tie over in there?
Yes, potentially.
We'll
And
learn more when we get the report.
Oh, okay, just to express for the committee, there are parties out and about who are concerned about where Airbnbs are located in. And as long as the report is gonna cover it, this is very good. Thank you.
The language that they looked at would specifically exclude, kind of a short-term rental, so it would allow the communities to continue to prohibit them if they so choose.
Okay.
But part of this report will also look at that because there are certain financing implications that are required. Potentially, whether the mortgage is going to be able to be resold to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they would require certain restrictions on both short-term rentals, but also the residential ability, the ability to rent the units out for long-term rentals as well. There's limitations on this, and this is one of the legal reasons they chose to go with the report as opposed
So
to.
that's the same question a little differently. And in this language would allow Airbnbs where they're currently not allowed.
Nothing in this language is going to change the current framework of the common interest community government and how they operate.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Okay, so now we get to page 15. This is also new. It was in S 328 as it came over. And there were a few minor language tweaks that the committee made on behalf of the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. Back in 2021, the Housing and Conservation Board actually they contracted out for the they contracted out to do a study on farm worker housing needs assessment. And that housing needs assessment had a list of potential kind of recommendations for future action to help address certain concerns with the housing stock of on-farm housing for farm workers. And so what this language here would do is saying by January 15th, 2027, VHCB needs to submit a report to the General Assembly identifying the progress that they've made towards addressing the goals that were outlined in that needs assessment. And then the next section 12 is a report from the Department of Housing and Community Development. There was a bill that was introduced and referred to the House General Committee that was going to put a limitation on the ability of certain real estate investment groups to be able to purchase single and multifamily dwelling units in the state. There was a time limitation on when they could purchase single and two-family residences. So the committee is including in this bill a requirement for DHCD to inform the committee these provisions on page 16. What bills have been introduced in other states that would put limits on corporate purchase of single and two-family residences, the number of covered entities operating in Vermont, the number of single and two-family residences owned by covered entities in Vermont, the number of single and two-family residences purchased by covered entities between 2020 and 2026, and proposed methods of enforcing to ensure effective implementation of any statutory restriction on the corporate purchase of single and two-family residences. I use the term covered entity there specifically because there is a definition, and it's a pretty lengthy definition. It's an institutional real estate investor or entity receiving funding from an institutional real estate investor. And it's not a nonprofit, it's not a land bank, it's not a community land trust, but it is a group that directly or indirectly owns 10 or more single-family residences, single-family or two-family residences, manages or receives funds pulled from investors, and acts as their fiduciary, and has $30 million or more in net value or assets under management. So for those entities, asking for information on how many single and two-family residences those types of entities own, how many have they purchased, and what other states have done to limit corporate purchase of homes, and how something like that would be enforced.
This is another report in session law.
My understanding is from the testimony in committee, the department has consented to this report. Okay, that brings us all to page 19, where there is a change in FY 24 appropriation to the Vermont Housing Conservation Board. So as I mentioned way above about this advisory council that is to support developing housing for individuals with developmental
Really says
disabilities.
24. Okay. Great.
Okay. And so this was a attempt to try to identify some funding to be used for continuing to develop housing for those individuals. So this $10 million was provided to VHCB back in FY 24. This would be expanding the continued use of those funds to allow them to be used for individuals who have supportive housing needs, or to create housing for individuals who are receiving Medicaid-funded development disability services. This language, my understanding, was included on the Senate side in the Senate's budget. It's also included here in this bill. And
Because there's money left over, is that what we're really talking about?
that's my understanding, yes, sir.
How much money are we talking about?
I do not know the answer to that question off the top of my head.
Chris, do you know?
Internet Trade Fiscal Office. I
Sorry, I
can talk
thought you were
about.
nodding towards Chris.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I was nodding towards, I could share while I'm in the chair or share it on the sideline, whatever works best for y'all. It is from Poly Major. It seems like it would impact $3.9 million of their remaining appropriation. There was a project that would be teamed with federal funding, and given federal funding changing around continuing care for people experiencing homelessness, that project was less viable, so we'd be reallocating it to two different projects, one of which would be supportive of individuals who receive Medicaid funded developmental disability services.
What happens to the interest on $50 million that's in a nonprofit for 2 years?
I do not know the answer to that question. I think it's probably more of a question for Jacob.
Let's hold it for a minute and finish the book.
Okay. Effective dates, the act shall take effect on July 1 of 2026, and that's the end of the bill. In response to the question, what I would say is, what I don't know is how the money is moved on the back end. So if something goes to VHCB, is it going to them and do they deposit into their trust fund that they manage for their housing that they build? If so, then, they would keep the interest that goes into that fund. But that's where I'm saying I don't know when you make these one-time appropriations to them of $10 million, does the money go to them at once, et cetera. So I don't know how to answer that part of the question.
Representative Higley and then Meslin.
Anyway, listen, if you could go back to section 1. So that's that common interest community resources.
Yes, sir.
What was your thinking around allowing the Secretary of State shall provide on its website or otherwise distribute to the public? But I guess, to me, I would think it would have to be both. Because what is distribute to the public, the information? What does that even mean?
Yes, sir. So this started from the fact that there was another bill introduced and referred to the House General Committee that would require the Secretary of State to contract out with a nonprofit to develop a common interest community resource center that would advise the public on issues related to common interest communities. These entities are very difficult to navigate. They have their own title, Title 27A, is the Uniform Common Interest Ownership Act. It's pretty extensive. And they get very, very detailed when you talk about how they're created, how ownership share is distributed, what portions of the property are owned in common versus your exclusive common use versus what do you own. And so there is a lot of, depth and detail there, and there's not really anywhere to go for the public to gather that information. you would need to hire an attorney and examine your own individual common interest communities, declaration and bylaws, et cetera. My understanding is that was kind of the thought process behind creating the resource center that was in the bill that was introduced. I think, I can't speak for the committee, but I imagine there was concern about moving that forward and how would it be funded, et cetera. And so they worked with the Secretary of State's office to come up with this. The Secretary of State's office testified that they do receive information or questions from the public because the association that governs the common interest community has to register with the Secretary of State. And so they do receive some inquiries from the public. That I think is where this came from. Now to your kind of second part of your question there, I will simply share with you all the same thing that I shared with the committee, which is I don't really know what this language does, if anything. It says that the Secretary of State has to provide information, and it doesn't say anything about what type of information. I mentioned that all it says is the information shall include the governing statutes. The governing statutes are published by our office. We publish them for the public in the green books, and then they're available on our website. And so conceivably, the Secretary of State's office could simply put a link on a web page that says Common Interest Community Resources, and you click it, and it takes you to Title 27A on our website. I don't know the rationale behind why they felt that this was important. But just sharing again with you what I shared with them, there's not really a lot of substance to this language, and I don't really know what it is actually going to require the Secretary of State to do.
Did the Secretary of State testify on it?
I don't recall if they testified. They provided feedback on the initial language that I had kind of penciled out. They don't like the use of the word website. And so that was removed at one point, and then the committee added it back in. So there was a little bit of back and forth. The Secretary of State's office was a little even more watered down than what you have here, if you can imagine that. So my comment to the committee was, I understand that you want the Secretary of State's office to do this, but based on what you have written, I would argue it may be just better to simply have their verbal confirmation on testimony that they will do this as opposed to putting it in statute. Because it's there is limited statutory space, and if somebody were to look at this, I'm not sure that it provides any real value to the public as far as what you're requiring the Secretary of State's office to do. So
Just two follow-up questions on that is, can someone go to the Secretary of State's website now and search by registered business names and pull up a common interest community now?
good question. I assume so, but that is an assumption. I don't know how they're listed. I don't know whether that type of search inquiry, yes, sir, is available on their website. But conceivably, you should be able to identify them, or the Secretary of State should easily be able to identify them and make that information available.
When I read that, I thought, oh man, it's gotta have their bylaws, their officers, their.
I do not imagine that that's the level of detailed information they would be able to provide, because first you would also have to link to the declaration, which would be filed in the municipality where the common interest community exists, right? So I don't imagine they're going, the Secretary of State, I don't think agreed to that level of information.
Yeah, Representative.
Two things. One is, can you tell us again, the special title for, common interest
Yes, sir. It's entitled 27A.
27A?
Yes, sir. It is the Uniform Common Interest Ownership Act.
And then one other thing, which is with regards to the pilot, I know we've gone over it a couple of times. I'm actually very impressed with what the concept is and how it's laid out. And the future is pilot and go to scale, I think, in many things. So, thank everybody.
Is there anything else to build?
Oh, ma'am.
Okay, any other questions from anyone? Okay, we'll pick this back up tomorrow after we hear from Ed today. Wasn't that confusing?
You're welcome. Always worried.
I'm not done with it.
I'm ready to go either way. Ted Burnett, Joint Fiscal Office. I'm going to share the fiscal note. All right. Madam Chair, how much would you like me to run through the mechanics of the increase in the treasurer's credit facility? I know we discussed it when 775 was here, and mechanically, I can remind folks generally high level of.
I think generally is great unless there aren't any changes to it, right?
No. Okay, so I will start with that. So by increasing the amount of the state's average cash balance that can be distributed through what is called the 10% Vermont program, it results in foregone interest income of up to $600,000 in future fiscal years. It's not a fiscal impact in fiscal year 27. That's because it's going to take time for the treasurer to stand up that additional lending, announce that money is available, receive applications from folks, and then get money out the door, and then have issue awards to folks, and then have projects ready with shovels in the ground to actually spend down that money. The amount of interest income of the foregone portion is simply from the fact that the treasurer can earn a higher interest rate from that money when it is sitting in the state's cash balance. Usually the return in that money is about 3.5%. The whole design of the 10% for Vermont program is to provide lower interest loans to folks. The average for that is about 1.5%, according to information from the treasurer. So that differential in interest income, that's what's creating the foregone revenue for that piece. The fiscal note has, so the difference is about the expansion of money that wouldn't be available to the state's cash balance, but would be available through the credit facility is about $30 million. The Service Supported Housing Advisory Council, Senate Appropriations took out the per diems for members of that council. House Appropriations will decide whether to add those back in, but wanted to note that it is a council that is currently not receiving per diems as outlined in the bill. The piece that is new for this committee is a change in the state community investment program. Essentially what this language does is it would allow all three, or new town centers generally, there are 3 in the state, Berlin, Colchester, and South Burlington. It would allow those new town centers to reach step 3 of the designation process if they meet all the other requirements. And so that would give these new town centers access to various funding sources, including here the Downtown Vibrancy Grant Program. The main one for this committee is sales tax reallocation funding program. Although it theoretically opens it up for all 3 new town centers, currently South Burlington is the only one that meets all the requirements to be eligible as a step 3 designated center. And so they would be the only one, but projects within that designated area in South Burlington would be able to access those programs. For a little context, particularly on the sales tax reallocation program, between fiscal years 21 and 25, the program awarded 8 projects in 5 municipalities that combined $3.5 million in reallocated sales tax. And so that is the sales tax reallocation program is for construction materials that are used to build a specific project. So this could increase foregone revenue to the education fund, although I will note that the sales tax reallocation program is subject to the same cap that the town and village tax credit program is subject to. So there's a combined amount of money, and that is, those things are linked together.
In addition to, or is included in the current 3 million?
It's my understanding it's included in the $3 million cap.
Can you step 1, step 2, step 3?
So this is the programs that are available from step 1, step 2, step 3. New town centers would be brought in by default absent this change at a step 2.
And then they do stuff to become a step 3.
Yes, exactly. This can be, they have a capital plan, a local downtown organization, there's various things they have to meet to become a step 3.
Section,
Oh, it's not,
That's why it,
wow, okay.
oh,
Wow. All right. My apologies. I'm sorry. That's my mistake. Absolutely. Moving on to the appropriation from VHCB. Yeah,
good. We'll stop thinking about it.
great. Good. I'm glad we can all stop thinking about it. As I mentioned in the chair, this change would allow VHCB to use $3.9 million in funding that was originally intended for one project to support 2 other projects. And one of which the indication is from VHCB. It would provide housing for individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities. Would not have a fiscal impact, it would just change the allowable uses of an existing prior year appropriation.
do you know the answer as to whether or not it's been allocated already in advance, or is it sitting in the treasurer's office?
I don't know for sure, since it is an appropriation, it depends on how the money gets out the door, but generally appropriations, they are spending authority. So they sit in the general fund until they are used by a specific agency that they're appropriated to. But I will check with the budget team just to confirm that that's the case.
Any other questions for Ted? Thank you so much. So I'll repeat what I said before, that we're going to pick this up again tomorrow. And might or might not have an amendment from House General to look at. And